Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As the sporting season comes with basketball around the corner and football underway, we all want to find that specific edge that we can have. Perhaps we want to lay some bets down and win a little bit of money on our favorite teams. Well, how do we discover that edge if we don't understand point spreads as well as we'd like to? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who's joining us with the basics of what is known as Vedic Astrology and how it can be applied to sports betting, techniques for predicting the outcome of any one-on-one competition, and more. Our guest today has had the opportunity to apply this to such things as the Belmont Stakes and first, second, and third place winners, big long shots, including other sporting games as well. I'd like to welcome the Beyond 50 radio program. Today our guest is Simon Chikoisky. His upcoming book is Betting with Vedic Astrology. Simon, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to warn you that I'm out in the countryside in Tahiti at the moment, and there are roosters and such all around, so if you hear some weird stuff in the background, there it is. That's what's going on. Well,
apparently what they're trying to do is apply this particular astrology in a way that they can get that edge that we're talking about. Tell us how you created a book, how this all came about.
Yeah, it was all pretty much by accident. I practice Vedic astrology, and today most people think astrology is just for spiritual or personality-type counseling, and that is a majority of my work. But I also use it to forecast events in people's lives. And one way to show that these techniques work is to test them in the proving ground of sports, because sports is black and white. There's no way to dispute a prediction because, a team either wins or loses, and sometimes there's a draw. But I got into this by accident during a World Cup match where the underdog blew out the favorite, and I thought, gosh, I should really pull the chart to see what happened. And once I did, I couldn't fully make sense of the chart, but then my little voice inside said, hey, pull the chart for tomorrow's game too, and it was the exact same chart. And I thought, okay, if astrology works, then there has to be the same result. So I went in and I made a wager, and this was Costa Rica. And those of you who follow European football or soccer know that Costa Rica went really far in the World Cup, and they upset a lot of people. And a $50 bet made me $800 on that game. And that was the beginning. I thought, wow, this really works.
Now, that's something that goes back to when the first bet was laid down, that edge that people are looking for. Now, is this something that's as accurate as it seems to sound?
Nothing is 100%, because we as human beings are inherently flawed creatures, or we don't use the full 100% of our brains, however you want to put it. So absolutely not. The system that I use isn't foolproof, but it does give results anywhere between, on a good day, on an average day, about 70% of the time, I would say. On a really good day, 80-90%. On a bad day, 50-60%.
Well, that's not too bad of an edge, that's for sure. Now, tell us exactly, what is Veda? How does all this work?
Well, yeah, that's the crux, isn't it? That's the great question. The core essence of how this system works is that in every question is the seed of the answer. The moment a question is asked, a forecaster, someone who is trained to tap into the matrix, whether they're reading sheep entrails or runes or tarot cards or using what I think is the most sort of complex and evolved system, which is Vedic astrology in general, it doesn't matter because these are tools. They allow us to plug into the moment that a question is asked, and by plugging into that moment, the seed of the answer is in the question, and it's sort of, you just have to decipher the code that's embedded in that question using the techniques of your art. And I know this sounds very philosophical, but there are some very practical tips I can give your listeners here today as well. So I don't know if that makes sense, but the thing is, ultimately, if you're really fine-tuned with yourself, with your intuition, if you're in a good space, the moment you ask a question or someone asks you a question, you'll get that hit, you'll get that sense of this is right or this is wrong. The answer is yes, the answer is no. And even sometimes when I was helping friends with predictions, I remember a buddy of mine said, "Hey, who's going to win the Golden State game?" And I looked and I said, "Hey, it's the other team." And he went ahead and bet on the other team. But his gut feeling, like he said, when I saw the Golden State's logo, it just appeared big and bright and colorful, and the other one didn't. But he went ahead and bet anyway. And of course, I was wrong. And I looked back and I thought, why was I wrong? The chart looked so certain, but I had entered the time in for the next day. So I had made a mistake, and based on that, and he didn't follow his intuition, and based on that, we lost. So the point is that everyone has the ability to tap in. It's just a question of, sometimes these tools help us to tease out our own knowing, and help us come to a conclusion.
Now, it's interesting because your title is, Gambler's Dharma. Now, what does that exactly mean? Because Dharma generally means, isn't that like life purpose or soul's purpose?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. And it is, and it is the purpose, or at least part of the journey for some people, to wager and not get stuck, at least not get stuck as much with the karmic fallout of gambling. Because listen, gambling it can be a vice. And that's why I prefer the term sports investing. If you treat this as an investment, and there are a lot of people who do, and they invest in sports outcomes just the way they would in stocks. The only difference is when you invest in a stock, sometimes you have to wait a year to get your return. With sports, you wait 2 hours, right? Game's over, and you've got your return. And so the results come much faster. But again, you have to be very disciplined. You have to be unemotional about it. It's not like my team is playing, so I have to bet on my team. Well, if your team isn't going to win, then, emotion has to be placed aside. So gambling can be dangerous, and the reason this book is titled Gambler's Dharma is because in the first chapter or so, I talk about who can do sports investing and who can't, and I give tips and tricks for staying, like I said, for keeping clean of that karma, because just like any addiction, sports gambling can be extremely addictive.
Well, there's no doubt about that, and I find it interesting that you say sports investing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and that's a term. I didn't make that term up. It's actually used amongst the elite who actually invest, and that's one of the techniques actually that I would suggest to your listeners is that watch what the large conglomerates are doing. Meaning, there are people who invest like in a mutual fund on the stock market. Well, in the sports world, there are people who have sports mutual funds. So you put in 1,000 or 10,000, whatever, and there's a conglomerate that bets, that moves in on different games. And so if you just watch how they bet, see, you don't even have to know all the players, all their stats, who had cereal in the morning, who didn't. You don't have to have that level of research. If you just watch where the conglomerates are betting, then you can figure out, well, gosh, these guys really think this team is going to win, so I'll just piggyback on them. And there's a way to do that. Does that make sense?
In a way, it does. It's kind of interesting. It's almost seemingly predictable in some ways.
Yeah. Well, there's in the sports investing world, there's a term. There are people called sharps, and those are the big time, the big players, and there are people called squares, like you and me, or me basically, which are the small time bettors. And the sharps typically have access to more information, maybe because you're paying thousands of dollars for all kinds of statistical data and whatnot, and inside tips and so on. So watching how these sharps bet is a useful strategy. Now, there's no astrology involved in this, and frankly, I really don't do this anymore because I just focus on the astro part of it. I don't have time to look at sharps and squares and all that. I'll look at a team, do the chart, boom, and I know whether the favorite or the underdog is going to win with a certain amount of reliability.
Now, I understand that, when you talk about relating Dharma and helping people find their life purpose, that this is one of those ways that this might be able to help them to do that?
Well, yes and no. I do this primarily to show, and I place bets also. One of the reasons is to show that astrology works. And a lot of people out there will go, well, how does it work? I mean, how can a planet, way out there affect what you do? And the answer is, it's not so much the planet that's affecting you, but there is some connection and indication between the macrocosm out there and the microcosm down here. And so I use this stuff to show that, hey, if I can be 70% and sometimes 80, 90% accurate with a sports prediction, which is, there's no emotion there. It's either win or lose. There's no, well, yeah, that could be. No, it's black and white. Then I can also hopefully be 70 to 80 to 90% accurate in my predictions for you, for things like, hey, will I ever find the right job for me, or will I ever get married to the person, to my soulmate, and that kind of stuff. So to me, the real usefulness is finding our Dharma, finding our purpose, and walking our path. And this is sort of a side thing that I just sort of, like I said, fell into and ended up writing a book about because it was so fascinating. It was such a journey. I had great wins and I had great losses too when I was learning certain techniques. And I talk about that all in the book, which is not out yet, by the way. It will be out in March of 2017.
Now, how often, when you talk about astrology and applying this to, let's say, betting, that people kind of might feel a little bit skeptical about this and think, well, astrology, I read my chart sometimes and it says this might happen, but it may not unfold the way that it says it does. How do you kind of work with this Vedic astrology?
Yeah, well, that's not astrology. The stuff you read in the paper is not really real astrology. It is based on your sun sign, and the sun sign is the same for everybody born within a certain month. So it groups everybody born, say, from November 21st through December 21st as one sign, as a Sagittarius. And it says all of you, say probably 1 billion people, have these characteristics. And while there is a level at which that could be true, that's like, flying at 40,000 feet and going, oh, these people are like this. Well, no, you can't. You have to get down on the street level to really understand what people are like. And so sun sign astrology is like the very, very, very broad, high view, which is not specific enough for most people. So we, professional astrologers put very little stock in sun sign astrology. In fact, some are kind of embarrassed by it, or at least by the misperception that sun sign astrology can foster in the public. So basically, the difference is we take your exact day of birth, exact place of birth, and even the exact time of birth, and create a special chart for that. And I'll put it to you that human beings are space-time events. We are born in a particular space and in a particular time. And a sports match is also a space-time event. It begins in a particular time and date and in a particular place. And it has an ending, except its lifespan is much shorter. It's an hour or two, whereas a human lifespan is 80 to 100 years. So using the exact time, date, and place, we can get a lot more specific about whether a person will experience highs and lows in their love life, their professional life, and when they can expect to experience them. And in the same way, we could look at a game and see, will the favorite win? Will the favorite lose? It's actually more simple for a game. So that astrology is actually a lot more simple than the astrology of humans. But yeah, that's the argument against sun sign astrology, the stuff you read in the newspaper.
And that's because that's what a lot of people have experience with directly.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah,
it's pretty
yeah.
interesting. You say that you really don't apply this to betting anymore?
I don't so much, and that's part of the Dharma, is when you feel yourself getting carried away with something, you got to step back and go, okay, because there was a point in which I was betting, the way I won, I started with $50. I made about $25,000 in the course of 6 weeks, betting parlays. And parlays are, you put 5, 6, 7 teams together, and they all have to win. And a $50 bet then becomes $5,000, and that's very difficult because even if one team loses, you lose that bet. So I started getting a little carried away with parlays and all these exotic bets and stuff, but it was part of my learning process. And the thing about me is I'm primarily a teacher and an educator, and that's my Dharma. And this was part of my process to help teach this to others. But playing every day and being in that grind, it takes time, and I came to the conclusion that that's ultimately not my Dharma. It's just to make money for its own sake. It's to pass on this wisdom and this knowledge to others. So I still play from time to time, but it's not an everyday thing.
So you really try to find more of the fun in it sounds like.
Exactly. Oh, and believe me, I hate to lose. I mean, you put $100 on something and you see that 100 go, it doesn't feel good.
And that's the truth. It's sort of like people who are, in Vegas and they have that sort of an attitude, where they have actually perhaps won at the blackjack table and figure, well, I think, Lady Luck is on my side. I'm going to kind of go with the flow on this, and then pretty soon they start getting cold cards. And they have that attitude, well, once I've got enough money in, I should keep going because otherwise it becomes a loss. And it's interesting how a gambling mind actually thinks.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for the gambling mind, the big payoff is right around the corner. And if I leave now, I might miss it. And that's total BS. Interestingly enough, there are ways. So using astrology, we can find people's best times to play. So best days and best times. And unfortunately, it's not something I can share on the radio because it's individual. It's different for you. Your days will be different, and Joy's days will be different, and someone else's days will be different because, again, it's based on your particular date and time and place of birth. You can even get to the point of your lucky direction. So which way should you face when you're playing blackjack or when you're pulling the slot machine? So there are, we can go down to that level, and there are astrologers. I certainly know how to do that. It's not too hard. So when people come and get readings, I can do a 5-6 month report for them of when their lucky days are. Lucky for gambling. See, there's lucky days for love. There's lucky days for profession. So they have to ask specifically what kind of luck, so to speak, they're looking for. And that's why, again, I don't believe in these, hey, you're this Chinese astrological sign, therefore your lucky number is 6. Well, no, that's too broad. And lucky for what? It could be lucky for buying a nice car, but you get dumped by the girl you're in love with. Well, were you lucky or unlucky?
Right.
Well, in love, right? So lucky for what is the question, and that's why professional astrologers, Western and Vedic, like to get a lot more specific.
Now, if a person was to apply this, it sounds to me like it's it's a system, but not necessarily a system that you can completely bank on. You really got to kind of get a feel for what's going on here, don't you?
Well, I think you can bank on it. 70% in the gambling world is unheard of, by the way. The people who are winning millions, people like, I forget his name, who was featured on 60 Minutes, they win 58% of the time. but they are serious investors. So if you can be at 60%, you are way above the curve. 70% is unheard of. Like that's like way, way, way high in the gambling, in the sports investing world. So when I say 70% to the average listener, that's like, not. I guess that's right. When you were in school, 70% was a C, right? So that's not. But for the sports investing world, that is a mark that if you can actually keep that up, you have millions within a year.
Interesting. Now, people listening to this today might think to themselves, well, I kind of want to buy into this. And what do you say to people that, these might be the kind of people that go from thing to thing, thinking, well, this is my next big break here, that sort of a thing. But it seems like you've got to really invest a lot more time into what's going on here, doesn't it?
There's nothing free in this world. And when you want to invest in something, you are investing your time. So one of the tips that I wanted to give your listeners today, it's non-astrology related, but it is one of the basic understanding among the sharps, those very savvy investors, is called Contrarian Bedding, meaning you bet against the public. So for example, let's say Atlanta or New England just blew out a team last week by 40 points. Now everybody's going, oh man, then New England has got to blow out the next team. They're so good. Brady was amazing. And so everybody among the square bettors, the average bettors, are going to be betting on New England. And so that's going to drive the spread. Now you may not know what a spread is, but just think of it this way. That's going to weigh the scale in the favor of New England. So what a bookmaker has to do is they have to balance that scale. So they're going to give you a lot more incentive to bet on the other team. So if the other team, say, was a 10-point underdog, now because everybody's betting on New England, they're going to make them maybe a 14-point or even a 20-point underdog. And that's when you go in and bet on the underdog. That's called betting against the public. And it's a proven winning strategy. It wins much more than it loses. And because you're also betting on the underdog, it likely wins a little bit more money than betting on the favorite would. So that's a well-known and well-practiced strategy amongst the savvy investors, is bet against the public. Now, how do you know whom the public is hitting? There are free sites, and I'm not part of these, so I'm not endorsing them because I'm part of them. I just use them. One is called sportsinsights.com. You can get that information there, and there are others as well, but that's sort of the main one. So contrarian betting is a good strategy if you're just sort of getting into this, and following the savvy investors, the sharps. So, and you can YouTube and find some videos on how to spot that. It's beyond what we can talk about here, but how to spot where the sharp money is going. And that doesn't require any astrology. Then when you add astrology into the mix, you can get a pretty decent picture of who's going to win a certain game.
Now, it would be interesting when you consider last year's NBA Finals. Now, I had the feeling that even in light of what was going on, that Cleveland was going to win the whole thing. That there would be a major upset. I really did, and I think the reason I felt that way is I felt Golden State was lofted so much they were just the Golden Boys. They didn't realize how hungry a guy like LeBron James could be. It's his 6th NBA final in a row. But they're down 3-1, and I remember years ago when the Phoenix Suns were in the same situation against the Houston Rockets in the playoffs. And, we're in great shape. And all of a sudden here this team rallies back from 3-1 down, boom, and they win it. And you have to wonder, how would you apply, or did you apply something like this to a situation like that?
Well, I did, and I actually bet on Cleveland that final game. I had a student of mine ask me when the series was 2-1, hey, who's going to win the series? And it was such an innocent question, I thought, okay, let's pull the chart and find out. And the chart showed clearly that Cleveland would come back from a huge deficit. And I thought, it's even, I mean, they're in a deficit now, but it's even bigger. Is that even possible? And so I kind of shrugged my shoulders sheepily and kind of said, well, that's what the chart is showing. I don't know. I mean, there you go. It says Cleveland will win after a huge, deficit. And that was it. And I thought, well, I'm not always right, so there you go. And it ended up being right. And the last game, and interestingly enough, I didn't make any bets because I thought I was wrong. I thought I was just, reading the chart wrong, or I didn't believe in the chart itself. And gosh, you don't know how many times that's happened, where the chart shows something and I said, no, that can't be. There's no way. My brain overruled that seed of the answer that was in the question. But finally I came around, and the last game I did bet on Cleveland. We won a little bit. And so yes, it can be. And it can also be done for elections. Hey, who's going to be the next president? Boom. You can pull the chart. You can pull the chart for practically anything. Should we have a chicken or a steak for dinner? You can pull the chart. Now, some things are more momentous than others, but it can be used to give you the answer or the best option in any given, when there's a choice.
Fascinating stuff. Now, when people get this book as it comes out, is it going to be, will there be instruction on how to understand, to read charts, things like that?
Yes. Well, yes and no. So here's the thing. I have a special DVD course for beginners, for people who want to find out who they are, what this whole astrology thing is about, and it's called Decoding Your Life Map with Vedic Astrology, and it's available on Amazon, and it's only $97. It's not a lot of money for the content that you get, which is what is my sole purpose on this planet? What is my major hang-up, and what is the antidote to that hang-up? How can I best express my energy? It really goes, there's no gambling in it, by the way, but you learn to read the map. And once you learn to read the map and apply it to your life, then you can use it, then you can take the book and start to make sense of how to use this in sports. But one thing that I'm going to offer for your listeners is two special bonuses if they choose to invest in decoding your life map. The first is I will print out, or I will send them up to 5 charts. So their own chart, so they can have it right there as they're watching the course and learning how to decode that map, but also 4 other charts of friends, family, anyone else. And these are, that's usually worth $20 a chart, so that's probably worth about $100. That's the price of the course itself. And so I'm going to offer that for your listeners. The other part is that we go into what is their primordial sound. And one feature of Vedic astrology is that it's linked to mantras and meditation and the whole Vedic tradition, which is a very spiritual tradition. And your primordial sound is the sound that is most, that vibrates most at your authentic level. So let's say the sound was P. So your first name would be Peter, right? So at least that's how they did it in the East. So whatever the first sound was, whatever your primordial sound was, they would name a baby based on that, so that every time you heard your name, it would resonate. It would feel like, yes, this is me. And if you don't think that names have an influence, I think we talked about this at one time, consider, ill-named people. People like, remember Princess Diana? What did people call her? They called her Lady Di, Lady Di, Lady Di, Lady Di. She died prematurely. Names have power, and if your name and the sounds that you're hearing aren't aligned, aren't congruous with who you are, it can create conflict. And so we go into your primordial sound. By the way, this is something Dr. Chopra has talked about and provides for people, but I give it to you for free. That's the difference. So that's all part of the Decoding Your Life map, which is available on Amazon.com, and they can just send me an email. Once you purchase it, send me an email, and I will send you all of that information.
And that website again?
So my website is spirittype.com.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the course is Decoding Your Life Map with Vedic Astrology. And that's available on my site and on Amazon as well.
Well, one thing I can certainly respect and appreciate that you said is, folks, this is still going to be work.
Yes.
You can't just read a chart and go out there and think you're going to have the edge and all things are going to work out because, well, as we know, life just doesn't work that way. But it's nice that you might have a little bit of running ground that might add some predictability in such a way that it might be an interesting mystery to unravel.
Absolutely. And if you have 10 games on a particular date, there may be only one game that really makes sense in the chart, because the chart might not make sense for 5 or 6 teams. It might be too close for another 3 or 4 teams, and there's just that one game that's clear. Well, then you know what to do. That's the game you're going to bet. So not every game is clear when you pull the chart. Not every question can be answered, and even I'm stumped sometimes when people go, hey, should I send my kid to Harvard or to Princeton? And I pull the chart, and I don't know, right? but sometimes it is clear. And in those cases, it's just we're not allowed access, we as the astrologer are not allowed access into that knowing, into that knowledge. But there are cases where we are, and the answer is very clear. And you go, yes, absolutely, it has to be Princeton because blah, blah, blah. And this has actually happened in my practice where I said they're going to meet the person they're going to marry when they go there, and this is going to, this. So it does happen, but not all the time.
I remember an original Twilight Zone episode, old Rod Serling series, and it was about this two-bit hood that ends up robbing somebody in an alleyway, and he ends up killing them, and then he ends up dying himself, and finds himself in this nice home, and here's this guy, he calls him the fat man. He says, well, who are you? And he says, well, I'm the guy to make sure that you get everything you want. And he says, really, what do you mean? And he says, well, just ask me for something that you'd want. And so he goes on, and pretty soon he has this nice pad, and he has women on his arm, and he goes out to gamble. He wins all the time. And realizes, well, this is an eternity. This isn't any fun anymore. And I couldn't imagine a system that people would think guarantees them the idea that they're going to win every single time, how much fun that could actually be. Now, I'm sure people would argue with me about that. Well, you're missing the point, all the money that you could have. But if you could do it all the time, how much fun would that actually be? Because the fact is, even in poker players, nobody can really remember the big hands they won, but they can certainly remember the big hands they lost.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's where the stories happen, right? That's amen to that. And I would put it to you that an eternity of that is actually hell. An eternity of nothing but getting what you want and winning ends up being hell.
Isn't that a fact? What was that website again one more time for our listeners? It
is spirittype.com.
Very good. Simon, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be with you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. Stay up to date with what's going on in the Beyond 50 community, as well as upcoming shows. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.